Actually, it's very interesting since Nick mentioned Caldera in his presentation. This is actually the next one and the second startup from the Stanford Blockchain Accelerator program. So next we have Matthew Katz, co-founder of Caldera, to talk about the case for dedicated rollups. So let's welcome Matt.
Am I able to go backward? Am I able to go backward or just forward?
You can try.
I can try. Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. Great to be here. Also, thank you, Nick, for the surprise shout out in his presentation. So you guys already kind of know a little bit about what we do. Today, I'm going to be talking about the case for dedicated rollups. Kind of, again, drawing from that modular thesis, hopefully not too redundant from the last talk. I am the founder of Caldera. Caldera is one such platform that helps people launch dedicated layer 2 blockchains. We are actually a Stanford company. Both myself and my co-founder spent some time here at Stanford, eventually dropped out just to found the company. And actually, this is very, very strange because the last time I was in this room, I was writing an exam that I absolutely bombed. I spent time at NFT NYC, my first crypto conference, rather than studying. And so if this goes poorly, I've got an excuse, and I can chalk it up to a bit of PTSD, but hopefully not. We are, in short, the easiest way for people to launch a dedicated rollup chain, or put another way, the easiest way for people to build blockchains on the modular stack. We view ourselves on some level as an infrastructure layer for modular chains. So we help provide all of the infrastructure that typical crypto teams need in order to build on the modular stack. That means that we let them focus purely on the stuff that they're good at, so like building front-end user interfaces, building smart contracts, et cetera, all using the tools they're familiar with, things like Foundry and Forge and Ethers and React on the front end, without needing to get bogged down in like protocol development or thinking about rollups or thinking about even on some of like thinking about DA or thinking about consensus, thinking about what rollup stack to use. We also, our end goal for what we're building is to make it as easier to build on modular chains as it is to build on like ETH-L1 or Base or Optimism or some other general purpose L2. So along with the chains that we provide all sorts of different infrastructure to try to get to feature parity with those more general purpose chains. So we provide things like block explorers, indexers, interfaces for bridging, just like general abstractions to improve the developer experience. And we also see ourselves as kind of like the connective tissue between other folks at different layers in the infrastructure stack and teams that are building on modular chains. So we connect the teams we work with to just folks who are building other pieces of infrastructure, things like block explorers, like Dora, like Lore, data providers like GoldSky, DA providers like Celestia or Eigenlayer, for example, just anyone else who's building things on top of the stack. And we are a platform, but for now at least, we also view ourselves as a white glove service. We help teams that are primarily application developers think through the ramifications of building their own chain, what stack to use, et cetera. And I think a lot of the value that we provide is working with other developers and kind of for the first steps of their foray into the modular ecosystem, help them think through these concerns. So you might have noticed, especially in the last like 2 or 3 months, that rollups are really in vogue. It went from being something that people really didn't talk about, or people mostly conceived of rollups as like these general purpose blockchains mostly used to scale Ethereum, to now something that's evolved a little bit more like the Cosmos thesis, especially around like the OP stack and the Arbitrum Nitro stack. You'll see a lot of like the thought leaders on Twitter talking about there being countless L2s and L3s, or thousands of L2s, or hundreds of thousands. And I don't disagree with these folks. I will say that like they tend to latch onto trends a little bit late, right? They're descriptivists, ultimately, they're not prescriptivists. So it's really, really cool to see this thesis play out, but oftentimes they're talking about what's happening right now. They're not necessarily talking about like why you as a developer or you as a founder might want to build on a dedicated L2. And for us as Caldera, we are one of the few companies that started building in the space way, way, way before it was super clear. We were founded in March 2022, back when the TAM for dedicated app chain rollups was approximately 0. And we've seen the space like play out and really grow. And we're seeing, we're one of the few teams that gets to talk to application developers who are building in this space. So I view ourselves as in like kind of like a privileged position to be able to understand the needs of developers and also like explain those needs to other people. So yeah, it answers the question like, but why, right? If you're an application developer, why would you actually want to build on a dedicated chain outside of like narrative and getting to do it and being one of the first to do it? Because really one of the things that people don't talk about is that deciding to build on a dedicated chain, like it actually does come with real costs. You're giving up a little bit on interoperability. You're giving up a little bit on composability with other protocols. You need to, again, like pay someone to run this infrastructure or build the infrastructure yourself. There are significant costs, and so it doesn't necessarily make sense for every application, but it does make sense for some. And today I'm going to talk about why it makes sense for some applications. And it comes down to one of three things, or some combination of three things. Either some amount of speed, performance, cost, customizability, or monetization. If anyone here runs Linux, you might know that the Google Slide emoji export is not great. Another reason why I should probably switch to using a Mac. There's supposed to be a rocket ship emoji there. Just imagine. So the first thing, obviously, that people talk about with rollups is performance, right? You can scale to hundreds of transactions per second, and those are dedicated transactions per second for your application. You also have ultra low fees. You can also kind of choose where in the trade-off space you want to explore when it comes to these fees. You can choose to use alt-DA like Celestia. You can choose to settle as an L3 or settle on some other chain to get lower fees. You can kind of explore the trade-off space and figure out, design your blockchain and make the decisions you want to make in order to like figure out what makes sense the most for your application. And the last thing is latency. So like people in the rollup space often like to debate around like finality and what that means. And I won't go into that debate. But from the perspective of an end user, you can provide soft confirmation really, really quickly from the sequencer. So if you want to enable like a Web 2 like UX, you can do that via rollup. You can submit a transaction to the sequencer, get a confirmation, get some commitment from the sequencer to some new state in approximately as fast as it is it takes to like ping like a Web 2 server. And for certain applications like games or social, et cetera, this is really important. This is especially important when usage gets high. So this is like a bit of an old example, but last year, this was like early 2022, Polygon had an issue with Sunflower Farmers, which was a game that committed user state to the blockchain every 10 minutes per user, and they paid for those transactions. And that meant that ultimately they were effectively like DDoSing the Polygon chain. And it led to basically every other application getting priced out of Polygon, leading to like a ton of congestion. The thing that should be mentioned is like this, I guess, was on some level due to like bad design from the Sunflower teams, not the Polygon teams. But it should be noted that like generally for rollups, the incentive of an application developer is slightly mismatched from the incentive of a developer of a general purpose rollup, right? They're trying to maximize activity in general. They're trying to maximize fees, maybe TVL in some sense. They're not necessarily trying to maximize activity to your application. So what you can see happen is like if you're one of 1,000 applications on some general purpose chain or general purpose rollup, you're competing for that block space with a lot of other applications. And the rollup team itself doesn't really care. They want to prioritize the applications that are generating the most traffic. That could lead to your application getting priced out. You don't run into that problem with a dedicated chain. Another thing I'll mention just on the TPS metric is that this is an effective way to like horizontally scale Ethereum. So on some level, like applications might need a dedicated chain, but Ethereum in general or the space in general can use these chains effectively to like parallelize execution across multiple different blockchains, and that like scales the total TPS of the Ethereum ecosystem in some nebulous way. The next thing is customization. You've probably, if you've seen other folks in the modular blockchain space talk, you've seen many diagrams such as this one. Effectively, like these are the different layers of the stack as conceptualized in the modular blockchain space. And really, like I'll kind of make the claim that all of the interesting, at least from the perspective of an application developer, all of the interesting customizations that can be made are mostly at either the top level or at the data availability level. So if you're modifying execution, you can do that's where like all the fun stuff happens. Where the virtual machine is, you can choose to change how gas works, what token you use to pay for gas, how fees are calculated. You can choose to change chain parameters, right? Block times, limits. We've seen, if you're here for Ed Felton's talk, you can change the smart contract language. You can start including, WASM smart contracts. You can add alt VMs, eventually, enabling Move smart contracts as L2s or Solana VM or whatever you want, Python. There's a lot of really, really interesting experimentation to be done at the execution level. And there are some interesting experimentation at the alt-DA level if you're an application. So you can kind of explore that data availability landscape, figure out what makes the most sense from a cost profile perspective, and use that for your application. If you're an application, there isn't as much interesting stuff at the settlement and consensus layer. Ultimately, I think these are kind of implementation details for a lot of folks who are working on, let's say, like a DEX or a game or something like that. They want something that's fast. They want something that's cheap. They want something that that they don't need to worry about. And like, truthfully, people don't make decisions on where to build based on settlement and consensus. So the nice thing about rollups is that it kind of abstracts those two areas away. That being said, like, this does mean that building on a rollup stack is theoretically less expressive than like the Cosmos SDK, for example, where you do have on some level like more control over settlement and consensus, et cetera. But I think most teams that are building like applications don't necessarily need this. And then the last one, more emojis missing. The last thing is monetization. So when you're running your own chain, you can control how fees work. This means you can get people to pay fees in a custom token, your own token, governance token, maybe USDC in order to improve UX. You can also customize how sequencer fees are generated. You can make money from sequencer fees. That's been a point of discussion for a lot of folks on Twitter, if you've seen that recently. All the way to like running MEV if you wanted to, whether that's like committing to fair MEV or using some scheme for fair ordering, all the way to like running some sort of MEV algorithm to extract value from your chain, maybe return some of it back to users via like an MEV auction. There are just like a lot of new paths to revenue and monetization that running your own chain provides. You might have seen a graph like this recently. Rollups are highly, highly profitable right now. So this is like the monthly profit. Not revenue, but profit for rollups over this year. And you can see across all of the major rollups, we're reaching over 8 million in some months, 5 to 8 million, 5 to 10 million. And this is during the bear market. So we've, in the crypto space, probably for the last decade, we have been kind of struggling to figure out how to monetize applications. And rollups are one of the few pieces of applications that actually has a credible case to, I think, like sustainable revenue generation without relying on like Ponzinomics and token inflation, et cetera. And so a lot of people are truthfully deciding to launch rollups right now to tap into this method of like sustainable revenue generation. So, that's all well and good. There are, a lot of reasons why people might want to launch their own chain. I think some of the things I talked about today are not all that similar from the reasons why someone might have chosen to launch their own chain in like 2018 with Polkadot or Cosmos. So there still is a remaining question: why now? Why are we seeing like this huge proliferation of rollups at this very moment? App chains themselves are not a new concept. We've seen Cosmos and Polkadot were both, I think, founded in 2016. They were, part of this initial generation of projects that were trying to make it easy to launch your own chain. We then saw last bull market, other folks emerge and kind of enter the space, AVAX subnets, Polygon supernets, et cetera. And I would even argue, if you were around back in the day in like 2012, 2013, that was like when app chains like really took off, where like in order to do anything, launch a new token, try something new, like everyone would just fork the Bitcoin code and launch their own chain, maybe with a different consensus algorithm or like different inflation schedule or something like that. So like there's a long, long, long history of people trying to launch their own chains. But for various reasons, like this is practically very, very difficult, right? Like for some of these, you might typically require or sort of like have a soft requirement for launching your own token and using the inflation of that token to incentivize validators. Some of these come with very high development costs. They're more like SDKs. If you're an application developer, you need to hire a new team or onboard yourself into more kind of like distributed systems in order to work with them. A lot of these have tenuous ETH alignment. So if that's something that's important to you, it kind of felt like moving away from ETH, building into a new ecosystem. Also for a lot of these, you needed to incentivize validators yourself. And there are different responses to this, right? Anything from like Polkadot, where you're kind of paying the protocol like rent in order to like use some of the validator capacity, to Cosmos, where you're kind of like on your own, you coordinate that off-chain, to like Polygon Supernets, which was, as far as I know, like basically like a corporate like consulting program where they would help you find qualified validators for your chain, and like you'd pay them to do that. Like there are all these different solutions to that, but that was like a very, very costly thing to do. And then, you know, now we have L2s, which solve a lot of these problems, right? Like they're very ETH aligned generally, or if you want to, you know, commit to ETH alignment, you can design your L2 in a way where, you know, you hit that threshold. You can use any token you want for gas. So you have some cost denominated in ETH, but you can charge your users in whatever you want. Most rollups nowadays, they still use ETH for gas. So they don't force you to launch your own token, but you can if you want to. You get built-in interoperability in the protocol, built-in trust minimized bridging with the layer 1. There's also a very, very low setup cost. And this is super important, right? Going back, a lot of that setup cost was that need to incentivize validators. Now you don't need to do that anymore, right? You can run this thing, basically, you know, right now, rollups are centralized. You run a centralized sequencer, you inherit security from some layer 1 chain or layer 2 chain. It's really, really easy to spin this up, and the costs are kind of pay as you go. You're mostly paying for data and settlement on that layer 1 chain. And so if you want to play around and like launch your own chain, you don't need to like hire a whole new team. You don't need to spend months recruiting validators. You can just kind of press a button, get started, and go. And also rollups themselves can be progressively decentralized, right? So like right now, every rollup in existence, or every rollup with like major activity, is using a centralized sequencer model, right? It's very, you know, some people don't like to admit it, but it's true. But that means that like as a SaaS service like ours, we can actually provide rollups that have a very, very similar security profile as the rollups that are currently running in production. So you have, you know, the same like similar level of security that you're getting with the stacks that are currently securing like billions of value, like the OP stack and the Arbitrum stack. We can run those stacks, provide a similar security profile, and also progressively decentralize as those protocols decentralize. And so it's much, much more amenable to like a software as a service, kind of more traditional cloud infrastructure model versus you know, needing to set up like a proof of authority chain. You still need to like recruit this validator set and coordinate amongst many parties, and you know, that is not super scalable from a business perspective. So yeah, I mean, Nick thankfully showed something similar, but we are like a no-code, under 10 minutes to launch, like batteries included, rollups as a service company. And so the unique kind of design decisions that L2s have made allow us to effectively do this like very, very quickly. The one thing I want to leave you guys with is this quote from Vitalik, which was all the way from back in like December 2021, when the modular space was truthfully like just kind of getting the ball rolling. And he was prescient as always, talking about a multi-rollup future for Ethereum, effectively bringing, yeah, this Cosmos multi-chain vision onto Ethereum, but using Ethereum as the base layer for liquidity and for data availability and shared security. And so with the proliferation of L2s, I don't see it as like an anti-Cosmos thing. I see it more as like a homecoming moment for all of the folks in the past who have tried to build technologies to allow people to build you know, their own chains. All of that momentum is coming back into the Ethereum landscape via L2s. So yeah, that concludes the talk. Thanks so much. If you want to contact me, find me outside or via these methods. Cool. Yeah, I guess do we have time for questions? Yeah? Sure. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. So the first thing is like, as I alluded to in the presentation, like we were quite early to this thesis. And so that's allowed us to be, I would say, like probably like the top 1 or in the top 2 RAS providers that exist. We kind of spent the first year just building because we believed in the thesis, and there wasn't really a market for this. So we have like an inherent kind of advantage, both in terms of like team size, momentum going into this, you know, et cetera. And that's kind of allowed us to like work on the product and improve the product continuously, as other people right now are like just securing seed or pre-seed funding and just starting. I would say in the RAS space in general, the biggest kind of split between teams is teams that are building on established stacks like us, OP Stack, Arbitrum Stack, and teams that are building their own stack, kind of like AltLayer, Eclipse, et cetera. That, people will have like different opinions on that. For us, like we see our major differentiator as like being infrastructure first, and working with the teams that are really good at building those roll-up stacks like OP and Off-Chain Labs with Arbitrum, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel and build our own stack. And so that allows us to like spend a lot more time investing energy into like infrastructure reliability and product, versus a lot of these other teams who I think are trying to they're trying to boil the ocean and they're trying to like monopolize too much of the stack. And so like that's one of the differentiators. But ultimately, I think for any use case, the space is going to be quite big. There'll be different RAS providers that niche down on different things. It'll just kind of be like cloud services where we'll have a few big players and a long tail of others. And it kind of depends on what application you're building to figure out what makes sense for you. Are we done? Yeah? Okay, thanks guys. You can find me outside.